It all started with a feud that went further than anyone in my quiet suburban neighborhood could have ever imagined. You've probably heard of bad neighbors before, the kind that nitpick over your lawn or complain about the color of your mailbox. But mine? He pushed things so far that I ended up doing something no one thought possible. I bought the very road in front of his house, and that was how I got my revenge. You might be wondering, how does a simple disagreement spiral into something like that? Well, let me take you back to the beginning, to Maplewood Estates in Texas, a place that looked picture-perfect on the surface. Tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes in the cul-de-sac. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked like something straight out of a postcard. But behind those white picket fences, there was one man who made it his mission to control everyone and everything. Richard Collins, or as most people called him behind his back, Rick. Rick was in his mid-50s, tall, stocky, with a permanent scowl etched into his face. He was one of those self-appointed kings of the block, sitting on the HOA board, walking around with a clipboard, jotting down violations like it was his life's calling. At first, I didn't take him too seriously. When my wife Emily and I moved in with our 2 kids, I brushed off his snide remarks about where I parked or the shade of paint we chose for our shutters. But over time, it became clear this man didn't want neighbors. He wanted subjects. The problems started small. He'd knock on my door to complain about the basketball hoop my son kept at the edge of our driveway, claiming it violated community aesthetics. He left passive-aggressive notes about trash cans being too close to the curb. One day, I even caught him taking pictures of my lawn like some kind of undercover agent. It was annoying, sure, but I figured if I ignored him long enough, he'd get bored and move on. But Rick wasn't the kind of man who got bored. He was the kind of man who escalated, and escalate he did. The real turning point came one Tuesday morning when I found my car boxed in by his pickup truck. He was standing there, arms crossed, smirk plastered across his face. "Michael," he said, drawing out my name like a teacher scolding a student. "This road here, it's private. HOA property. You can't just park where you feel like it." I stared at him, stunned. The spot I'd been parking in for months wasn't in front of his house, wasn't blocking his driveway, wasn't against any written rule I'd ever seen. But to Rick, facts didn't matter. Control did. That day I was late to work because I had to wait for him to move his truck, and the whole time he made a show of teaching me a lesson. Emily tried to calm me down later that evening. "Just let it go, Mike," she said. "He's not worth the stress." But she wasn't. The one getting constant HOA, letters in the mailbox, or fined for so-called infractions, like leaving a garden hose coiled up on the porch. Over the next few weeks, things only got worse. Rick started harassing the kids, too. He scolded my daughter for riding her bike too fast down the street. He told my son he wasn't allowed to skate in the cul-de-sac. One time, he even shouted at Emily for having a delivery truck stop in front of our house for more than 5 minutes. It wasn't just petty, it was personal. I began documenting everything. Every note, every time he blocked my driveway, every baseless fine. A small part of me thought maybe I'd need it for legal action someday. But at the time, I didn't know just how far this would go. The boiling point came on a sweltering July afternoon. I was mowing my lawn, earbuds in, when I noticed Rick pacing up and down the sidewalk in front of my house. I took out one earbud, and that's when I heard him shouting, "This whole road belongs to the HOA. You don't own a damn inch of it," he barked. Neighbors peeked through their blinds, kids stopped playing. The whole street froze as his voice carried. That night, sitting at the kitchen table, I finally said to Emily, "Enough is enough. He thinks he owns the road? We'll see about that." At first, she thought I was just venting, blowing off steam. But the next morning, I started making calls. I researched county records, digging through property maps, deeds and zoning details. What I discovered made my jaw drop. That stretch of road Rick claimed as his kingdom, it wasn't actually owned by the HOA. It was technically under county jurisdiction, classified as an unassigned parcel. And better yet, it was available for purchase. The idea sounded insane, even to me. Who buys a road? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. This wasn't about property anymore. This was about standing up to a bully who thought he could push me around forever. I spent weeks meeting with county officials, lawyers and title clerks, making sure I wasn't crazy. Each time I expected someone to laugh me out of the office, but no one did. Instead, they confirmed what I already knew. With the right paperwork, the right payment, and a mountain of patience, I could indeed buy that road. Meanwhile, Rick kept up his harassment, completely unaware of the plan brewing behind the scenes. He wrote up another violation notice because I left Christmas lights up past January. He reported me to the HOA for having a friend's car parked overnight. The man was relentless, but every smirk he gave me, every sarcastic comment only fueled me more. I didn't tell a soul in the neighborhood about what I was doing. I wanted the reveal to be perfect. Only Emily knew, and even she doubted it would really happen. "Mike," she said one night, "this is a huge gamble. What if it doesn't work out? What if you're just wasting money and time?" I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Then at least I'll know I tried. But if it does work out, Rick will never see it coming." The process was long and grueling. Paperwork piled high on my desk. Lawyers emailed back and forth, and I drained savings I'd set aside for home renovations. But finally, months later, I held the deed in my hands. The road, yes, the very road Rick claimed he controlled, belonged to me. The first morning after the purchase was finalized, I stood at my window sipping coffee, watching Rick march out of his house like he always did, clipboard in hand. He strutted into the street ready to find something, anything to complain about. But this time I wasn't the one under his thumb. This time the power had shifted. I hadn't told him yet, of course. That moment needed to be perfect, calculated, unforgettable. But just knowing what I held in my hands made me feel lighter, stronger. For the first time in years, I was ahead of him. And soon he'd know it too. But I couldn't just drop the bomb. That would be too easy. I wanted him to feel it. To experience the same helplessness he'd inflicted on me, the same frustration of being boxed in, powerless against someone else's authority. And when that moment came, I was going to savor every second. The stage was set. The deed was mine. The only thing left was to show Rick the new reality, one he would never, ever forget. The morning I chose to make my move started like any other. The Texas sun baked the street, kids rode their bikes, sprinklers ticked across neatly trimmed lawns. Rick was already outside, pacing the road like some kind of self-appointed sheriff, barking at a delivery driver who had parked too close to his driveway. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, heart pounding with anticipation. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind for weeks, every word, every expression. It wasn't enough to just hand him the deed and say, "I own this now." No, I wanted him to feel the same sting he had inflicted on me and my family for years. I wanted him to taste powerlessness. I walked down my driveway calmly, papers in a neat folder under my arm. Rick saw me coming and rolled his eyes. "Michael," he groaned, "don't tell me you're here to argue about another violation. I've already filed the report." I stopped right in front of him, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. "Actually, Rick," I said, voice steady, "I came to talk about the road." That got his attention. His smirk spread, the one I had seen too many times before. "Ah, finally. You're admitting it's not yours to park on. Good. Maybe you're learning." I opened the folder, pulled out the crisp deed, and held it up so he could read the bold print at the top. "No, Rick, what I'm saying is this road. It's mine now." For a moment he laughed, a sharp mocking sound. "Yours? Don't be ridiculous." But then his eyes scanned the page, confusion flickering across his face. His laugh faltered. He read again, slower this time, his lips moving silently over the words. Silence. Then the color drained from his cheeks. This is a mistake," he stammered. "This road belongs to the HOA. It always has." I shook my head, savoring every second. "Not anymore." I checked with the county. I filed the paperwork. I paid for it. As of last week, Rick, I own this entire stretch. You've spent years telling me what I can't do on this road. Now you'll need my permission to set foot on it. Neighbors were starting to gather now, curious about the confrontation. Curtains twitched, front doors cracked open, a small audience forming. And for once, they weren't watching me get humiliated. They were watching Rick. His voice rose shrill with desperation. "This is illegal! You can't just buy a road!" I smiled, calm and unshaken. "Funny, that's exactly what I thought at first. But as it turns out, you can. And I did. Which means all those complaints you've thrown at me, all those fines, all those threats, they don't mean a thing anymore. Because you don't make the rules here, Rick. I do. The look on his face was priceless. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For years he had thrived on control, feeding off the fear and frustration of others. But in that moment, in front of half the neighborhood, the control was gone. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply folded the deed back into the folder and turned to walk away. But just before I reached my driveway, I stopped and looked back at him. "Oh, and Rick, if you'd like to park your truck out here in the future, you'll need to send me a request in writing. I'll consider it." Gasps and muffled laughter rippled through the onlookers. Rick's face turned crimson. He stormed off toward his house, muttering under his breath, slamming his door so hard the windows rattled. That should have been the end of it. But with men like Rick, nothing is ever that simple. Over the next week, he tried everything to discredit me. He called the HOA, demanding they intervene. He filed complaints with the county, insisting the sale was fraudulent. He even went door to door with a petition, begging neighbors to side with him. But the deed was ironclad and the county backed me up every step of the way. The more he fought, the more pathetic he looked. Neighbors who once feared him began to laugh at his tantrums. Parents who had once whispered their frustrations now waved at me, thanking me for standing up to him. I became the quiet hero of Maplewood Estates, though that was never my intention. I didn't want glory. I wanted peace. And slowly peace came. Rick started staying indoors more. The clipboard disappeared. The notes stopped showing up in my mailbox. His truck, once parked proudly in the middle of the street like a trophy, was now tucked quietly in his driveway. It was as if buying the road had taken the fight right out of him. One evening, weeks later, Emily and I sat on the porch watching the kids play. The neighborhood felt lighter, freer, as though a shadow had been lifted. She leaned over and whispered, "I can't believe you actually did it. You bought a road." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I didn't buy it for the power. I bought it to prove a point." "And what point is that?" she asked. "That no one," I said, staring down the quiet, sunlit street. "No one gets to bully us on our own doorstep." And that's how a feud with a neighbor who thought he owned everything ended with me, holding the deed to the very ground, beneath his feet. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. So if you've ever dealt with a neighbor like Rick, you'll understand the satisfaction. And if you're dealing with one now, take this as proof that sometimes the best way to win isn't by shouting or fighting, it's by outsmarting them in a way they'll never forget. Because in the end, Rick learned the hard way. The road to power doesn't always lead where you think. Sometimes it leads right to the county clerk's office. And sometimes your neighbor buys it out from under you. So what about you? Have you ever had a nightmare neighbor who thought they ruled the block? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if you enjoyed this tale of suburban revenge, make sure to check out my other videos for more stories you won't believe.